Testing, testing. Can everyone hear me? Am I loud enough for you, Eric? Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is the final event of the 13th Annual Michigan Conference on Affordable Housing. It's been another great conference. We want to thank all of you for attending. I'd like to give a special thanks to James Butler, who convened a group of folks this morning from across the state. Some special mayors and representatives of the mayors and cities who came from all over Michigan to have a pretty healthy, in-depth discussion about some of the challenges they're facing and some of the things that they and we all together can work on. We have a couple of tables of them up here in front. We won't ask them to stand up, but we do want to let them know we appreciate them coming. We hope this is the first of a series of conferences that they'll attend, and we will certainly invite them back next year. As you all know, one of the important things that make all of our work so positive and so productive are all those sponsors and the partners and everybody working together. One of the key partners in this community development industry, and one of the partners that's been very key to all of us for a lot of years and also a big sponsor of the conference, is LISC NEF. I'd like to, at this point, ask Tahira Ziegler to come up to share a few words about LISC, and then she will also introduce our main speaker. Tahira.
Good afternoon, community development friends. How are you? I work for Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is a national community development financial institution, and I'm here also representing our affiliate, the National Equity Fund. We do a lot of work rebuilding neighborhoods, helping neighbors, and trying to build neighborhoods into sustainable communities. So over the past 30 years, National LISC is 30 years old. We've created over 271 affordable homes, but also apartments. And we've really created about 400 and partnered with other folks, 400 million square feet of commercial and community space. We also have invested in schools, child care facilities, and renovating fields for youth and youth kind of activities. And really this has impacted over 500,000 children across the country. NEF, our affiliate, has invested about 9 billion, 90 would be awesome, but $9 billion in low-income housing tax credit projects across the country. But I want to talk to you just for a minute about what we've done in Michigan. We have really invested in about 8,000 homes and apartments in Michigan, both with the Detroit LISC office, but also the Michigan statewide program. And we've also developed about 2 million square feet of commercial space. And so I just want to take a moment, we don't do this alone, we do it with a lot of our partners across the state, but I'd like just to have our Detroit and Michigan LISC people stand up if you're in the audience, just so folks can see the team that really is behind all of this work. Thank you. So I have the honor and privilege today to introduce Bruce Katz, who is the Vice President at the Brookings Institute and also the founding director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program, which really provides decision makers with policy ideas for improving the health and prosperity of cities and metropolitan areas across the country. Mr. Katz is a graduate of Brown University and Yale Law School. He also advises leaders on policy reforms that advance the competitiveness of metropolitan areas, and he counsels on the shifting demographic and market trends, as well as on policies that are critical to metropolitan prosperity. And he even counsels on new forms of metropolitan governance. After the 2008 presidential election, Bruce co-led the Housing and Urban Transition Team for the Obama administration and served as a senior advisor to the new Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Sean Donovan. And he helped him for the first 100 days of his administration. Bruce is also a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, and he's lectured across the country and also about urban and metropolitan issues in 7 countries across the world. In 2006, he received the prestigious Heinz Award in Public Policy for his contributions to understanding the function and values of cities and metropolitan areas and profoundly influencing their economic vitality, livability, and sustainability. And before joining Brookings, he served as the Chief of Staff to Henry Cisneros, former Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and he's also served as the Staff Director of the Senate Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Affairs. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Bruce Katz up to the stage.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and I know you all have been here for a couple days, and I hope this has been a really successful conference at a critical time for this sector and for this state. And you know, I've been noodling around with this speech for a couple months, and you know, so being able to deliver it here is really a great opportunity. I call this beyond the recession, the great housing rebalance. And obviously we're meeting at a pivotal time in this country, and the ravages of the collapse and the recession it precipitated remain in painful evidence. When you look across the country, home values have declined by an average of about 18.5%. But as you know, that's not a uniform figure. Some states like Texas were barely affected by the housing collapse. You know, others, Florida, California, Arizona, and Nevada, these were states that were sort of fueled by housing consumption. They've seen home values in some of their metropolitan areas decline by 50%. Michigan has seen your cities and metros almost as affected as the Sun Belt and southern and sort of housing-led states because of economic restructuring. And the Detroit metro, as the list people know, you know, home values have declined by about 42%. In Grand Rapids by 26%. When we talk about foreclosures, the foreclosures in this state, particularly in cities ravaged by subprime mortgages, have been extensive. So you know what the barometers are. I mean, frankly, things would be a lot worse if the national government had not stepped in starting in the middle of '08, but moving forward through the Recovery Act and taken steps to prevent foreclosures, stabilize neighborhoods, boost demand, ensure access to capital, and begin to put in place a regulatory architecture to protect consumers and curb abuses. I don't want to focus on the past today, nor frankly do I want to focus on the present. I want to focus on the future of housing and housing policy in the United States. So, like the Great Depression, I think the Great Recession is a turning point for the American economy, and I think it's a turning point for the housing sector. You know, simply put, there will be no return to normal since what preceded this recession was anything but normal. It's not sufficient to simply clean up the mess and go back. We need to purposely engage in a restructuring of housing policy that aligns with big demographic, economic, and environmental changes. So the Great Recession, if we're smart, should be followed by a great housing rebalance. And I think that really has 3 components, and then I'll talk about that with some specificity. First, we have to drive a rebalance between homeownership and rental. HUD Secretary said before the Congress last year, the crisis reaffirmed the need to achieve a better balance between ownership and rental housing and to provide more options and better options for families. He's absolutely on target. I think for several decades in this country, policy distorted tenure choices in this country. We need to align housing policy and production with essentially a demographic transformation that's underway in the U.S. Second, I think we need to drive a rebalancing between housing and the environment at the scale of both individual buildings and the environment writ large. Residential housing and the built environment are major contributors to energy consumption and global warming. It's inconceivable that we could meet the new energy and environmental imperatives unless we rewire the housing sector and development patterns more broadly for reduced energy. And finally, and this is probably the most important thing, we must drive a rebalancing between the housing sector and the productive sectors of our economy. So the Great Recession, from my perspective, was a wake-up call. It revealed an economy that was completely out of whack, characterized by debt, frenzied with consumption, innovating in the wrong things, where housing actually became a leading sector rather than a derivative sector. I think we need to deliberately restructure the U.S. economy, and this will be federal, state, metro, local, private, civic, toward an economy that's driven by exports, empowered by low carbon, and fueled by innovation, and rich with opportunity. Housing will play a different role in that kind of economy. But it doesn't mean that housing outcomes will worsen. I think actually the opposite. If we build a productive and sustainable economy in this country, if we make things again, more people will be employed with better wages and better incomes and be able to buy and purchase and rent better housing. As a Wall Street Journal op-ed said recently, American policymakers got it backwards. In the long run, jobs support housing, not the other way around. This is going to require some big shifts in policy. Frankly, it's going to require some big shifts in culture. I think some very important steps are underway, but as you'll see as I go through this talk, I think much more radical surgery needs to be done, even with regard to tax expenditures and the mortgage interest deduction. So let me start with my first proposition. In the aftermath of the recession, we must drive a rebalancing between homeownership and rental. This is already underway. The homeownership rate in the United States peaked at about 69%. In mid-decade, it fell to 66% by the end of 2010. Most economists think it'll fall even further in the coming years. Michigan has always had a higher homeownership rate than the country as a whole. You're actually like Mississippi, Alabama, West Virginia, Maine. You had a peak of 77% in 2008. It's fallen back to 74%. The tumble in the rate is not surprising given the wreckage of this recession. Foreclosures, ruining of credit, the tightening of lending. But this is not a short-term phenomenon. It gets back to demographics. Our demographics are changing, and demographics are what drive housing choice. We're a growing nation. We hit 300 million back in 2006, and we're on our way to hit 350 million around 2025. We're a diversifying nation. 83% of the growth this decade was driven by racial and ethnic minorities. We're an aging nation. We feel it every day, right? The number of seniors and boomers crossed the 100 million mark this decade. This has